Hello ladies and gentlemen, this is Blue Maxima and I want to talk to you for a bit about Cannon Spike. First things first, before I get into why I decided to play Cannon Spike of all things, I have absolutely terrible footage of this game because OBS's settings kind of went to shit and I couldn't figure out how to fix it before I needed to record this footage, so yeah, this footage is going to end up a little bit blurry, especially when the game really starts moving. And I do apologize about that. I don't know what caused OBS to break. I think it was an update, but, well, I'm trying to figure it out. I'll hopefully have it figured out before I need to record any more footage of anything. So, anyway, this is Cannon Spike. It's a Dreamcast game created by Psycho. I don't know if I pronounced that properly. And it's also published by Capcom and has plenty of Capcom characters in it. It's got Cammy from Street Fighter, a very clear rip of Vega, although he's called Balrog in this game because, well, you know, the Japanese and English, like, little swapping that they had going on of the Balrog and Vega name. And there's a couple of other characters from Capcom franchises too, although I'd be lying if I said I remembered what their names, who their names were and where they came from. Although I think Arthur is actually Arthur from Ghouls and Ghosts, or Ghosts and Goblins, one of the two. But yes, Cannon Spike was originally an arcade game, but much like many arcade games from the time from certain publishers, it got ported to the Dreamcast, and I am playing the Dreamcast version because it's the easiest to get my hands on, and I'm actually doing an article on the Dreamcast right now for the site that I write for, so I figured to myself, now would be a good time to replay some of the old classics, and Cannon Spike was the one I decided to do a video on, because if I'm being perfectly honest, it's probably low-key my favorite Dreamcast game. I really don't know what part of it appeals to me so much. It's very clearly a bit of an echo of the sum of its parts, but still, I like it for some reason. So let me just tell you about the basic mechanics and how it works. You've got 10 levels to go through, although I do believe that it cycles around if you manage to beat it. I've never actually managed to beat it. I've never had the opportunity to play much of it, but I've never actually managed to beat it. I've come close more than a few times, but I've never managed to get the final boss down below its last... I've never been able to get the final boss more than below halfway its health bar. But yes, the overall basic idea of the game is simple. It's a high-speed shooter. You have the ability to do 4 different kinds of attacks. You've got a regular shot, which fires well, not all the time, but it will continuously fire as long as you hold down the button. You have a heavy shot that you can fire with the... I was playing this on the Xbox 360 controller, so the actual layout on the Dreamcast might be a bit different. You press the X button to fire a heavy shot, which fires off... It depends on the character. You've got 5 different characters who all have their own sets of attacks. You press the X button, and it fires off that heavy attack. Usually it stops you dead still, which means it's really hard to actually avoid attacks. You've also got a light and heavy melee attack, which is interesting. They usually do ridiculous amounts of damage, but of course you're putting yourself in a lot of danger getting close to a lot of bosses in this game. Especially certain ones like the goddamn robots that show up on one of the city stages, because man, they absolutely love swarming you if they get the opportunity. You do also have a set of special attacks that you can use by doubling up on the short attacks and the melee attacks, and there's also a special attack which you can use if you press I say all 3, but you can press 3 buttons and it'll do a special attack. I always forget those exist. That's probably the reason why I've never managed to beat the final boss. But yes, it's also got the weirdest control scheme that I've seen in a while, but I also think it's a good example of how, I say in a while, I have played this game on and off over the years, but it is still one of the weirder control schemes that I've seen for a game like this. You'd think it'd be a pretty basic twin-stick shooter these days, but they hadn't actually figured that out, not to mention that the Dreamcast didn't actually have twin sticks. So the way that you attack is that when you hit any attack button, it'll lock the direction that you're firing in. For the regular shot, that just means you'll be stuck facing in that direction. But in this game, it also means that for things like heavy attacks, you'll be stuck facing in that direction until the attack is done and you can move again. But you have a lock-on ability where if you face the enemy combatant and then hold the right trigger, it will lock onto that enemy and you'll be able to continuously fire at it, but only for a limited time, because being able to lock onto an enemy forever in this game would make it way too easy, because all you need to do is hold down the lock-on button when you're fighting a boss, for example, dodge all the attacks, and then that's it, you're done. Even enemies in this game which are more capable of dodging shots are basically just open to fire forever if you're able to lock onto them forever, because they will eventually slow down and let you get a few hits in. So it would basically just become a game of dodging. So this insistence on having to re-engage the lock-on and needing to continuously move around, because there are a lot of enemies with a lot of painful attacks that will absolutely wipe the floor with you, make things a lot more interesting, because it definitely turns into a game of when can I safely face the enemy in order to successfully regain lock-on, because you need to face at them and move towards them in order to regain the lock-on. It's not something that happens automatically. So you find yourself deciding between moving out of the way of the bullets, facing the enemy and moving towards them again to lock on, and then getting the hell out of the way of all their attacks, deciding whether or not you want to go for light or heavy shots, because there are some heavy shots that have unique properties. Like there's one character who has a piercing heavy shot, which works absolutely fantastically for large groups, but at the same time when you've got single boss monsters, it's not anywhere near as effective. When you're playing as Arthur, for example, his melee attacks are ridiculously strong, but absolutely leave him open to melee attacks, which is not great in the slightest. So depending on who you're playing and what your capabilities are, you're always left with a lot of options, which I appreciate. Do I go for just the light attack and try and will him down a bit and wait for a better opportunity? Do I take my chances and use my heavy attacks? Do I get in close and just try some melee combos and hope that he doesn't decide to try and melee me back? How much of this do I do with lock-on? Do I just rely on just random aiming and hope for the best? This is also helped out by the fact that you can regain health if you do get hit, which is a nice touch, but for some people who don't enjoy things like only healing a tiny amount of health when enemies take off a massive amount when they hit you, this game might piss you off. Even the most basic enemies do like 1 health bar worth of damage, and things like boss monsters absolutely do more than 1 per hit. So it can absolutely be a bit ridiculous when you're getting absolutely destroyed by an enemy and then they drop like 1 health worth of healing, and it's like, are you kidding me right now? Not to mention that you get iframes when you use your special shots, so you really do need to learn the best opportunity to pull them out. So the game itself ends up maintaining an absolutely ridiculous pace because of all of that. Hell, sometimes it even turns into just outright bullet hell, because you don't have much in the way of like invulnerability frames when you get hit, and by much I mean you get like a couple. If you get knocked flat on your ass, you'll get more than you normally do, but just regular bullet patterns, you can get hit by them consistently and they can take off your health way quicker than even the bigger attacks can. So sometimes it's even worth asking the question, is it worth getting hit by this big attack in order to deal an even bigger attack and get through and hopefully get some healing on the next mission when you're facing off against the enemies? Because there's a couple of downsides to this game. One is the level designs, mainly because a lot of them are more or less pretty simple square designs with, basically just enemies running around them. And then you get to a sub-boss, and then you get thrown into a different arena to deal with the boss in general. It's kind of repetitive, and so it's not something I recommend you play for hours on end unless you're absolutely determined to get like a massive high score or what have you. Because that kind of means that, you know, that means you'll have to be playing through the same 10 stages over and over again. It doesn't swap out like any stages. Sometimes the order gets changed, but you'll be playing through the same 10 stages every time. And another little problem that I kind of have with it is that the game is kind of bad at detecting direction. Now, I don't know if this is my Xbox 360 pad, the emulator, or the way the game was designed itself, but sometimes getting the direction right can be a little bit of a pain, especially if you're trying to do really quick changes back and forth. Like if you're trying to do a missile shot, and then you try to back up a little bit, and then you try to fire off another missile shot in roughly the same direction. The game seems to like go between like 8-way digital directions and analog directions at random, Again, I'm pretty sure this is an emulation bug because I've never actually had the opportunity to play this game on real hardware. I'd love to have the opportunity to play this game on real hardware, but have you seen how much a Dreamcast costs these days? It's kind of ridiculous. But yeah, the directions can get you killed sometimes. This might be solved with a better controller. I'll never know personally, but still, it's just kind of annoying. It's something you have to learn to deal with. Be a little bit more like deliberate in your actions than you might expect from a game with this sort of pacing. It very much reminds me of Xeno Crisis, which is a game that came out way after it. But I'm just pointing out that's what it reminds me of, because it really does remind me of Xeno Crisis and the way like it handles its action, making it so that you've got a restriction on the way you can move and the way you can shoot, and then it builds the challenge around that. Sometimes it gets a little ridiculous. Sometimes it can feel a little bit unfair. As I said, the directions can be a little bit off sometimes. But overall, the game's pace is fast, furious, and it has just a lot going for it. I really enjoy the hell out of Cannon Spike. I absolutely love the pace of its gameplay. I like the variation on all the characters to the point where you can very easily pick a favorite and try and get used to it. There's like 7 characters in this game, by the way. They all play differently too. There's like bloody Roland Mega Man from, I think it's Mega Man Legends, but it might be Mega Man X. I'd be lying if I could tell by... No, Mega Man Legends wasn't out by this point, was it? I think it only came out after this. But still, there's a lot of different characters with a lot of variations. The action is really intense. It's got a lot of different bosses to learn how to fight. The overall controls, while being a bit iffy from time to time, are great. And they're a fantastic example of challenging the player without outright crippling them. Because there are a lot of games, especially from this era and the era before the generation before it, which were sometimes known for making it so that you were particularly gimped in ways that felt particularly unfair. But in this case, they did a pretty good job of balancing it so that it doesn't feel unfair while at the same time still being challenging. And I highly recommend it. It's absolutely great to pick up for, like a once in a while, just arcade game to unwind with, de-stress with, although it's not really exactly relaxing. But if you're like me and you like playing games that give you a little bit of challenge, but not so much as to feel unfair, Cannon Spike absolutely feels like that level. Also Cammy, because Cammy, absolutely adorable in this game. It's so weird, like, the name Cannon Spike, it's literally named after her set of moves in Street Fighter. That's it. Like, there's nothing, there's no other reason for this game to be named Cannon Spike other than to be a tribute to Cammy's glorious kicks. So, God only knows why they decided to call it that outside of that, but there you go. It emulates, as far as I can tell anyway, except for the potential control things, absolutely fine on Redream, which is the emulator that I'm using to play this. So if you ever get the opportunity to play it, I fully recommend it. This is basically just a delay video while I wait for more stuff to come out, because seriously, you've got like Halo 2 Anniversary on the Halo Master Chief Collection on PC, you've got the new Project Diva game, and you've got, what's it called? What was the other thing? I need to go look it up on my bloody to-do list now. I've got it. Star Wars Episode 1 Racer. That's it. That's coming out on the bloody Switch, and I'm going to do a video on that because I love that game. I want to see if the port is any good. I'm going to shut up and let you watch the rest of this Cannon Spike footage now. I'll see you all next time.